to distract them from running their companies. I fear that's what this bill will create, and I urge my colleagues to take another look and see how we can address those concerns. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Illinois.
I ask unanimous consent to cloture motion with respect to the motion to proceed to calendar number 44S601 be withdrawn further than at 2:15 p.m. on Tuesday, May 7th. The motion to proceed to S601 be agreed to. The Senate begin consideration of the bill.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, in the closing 10 minutes, the four proponents who will speak will be first Senator Heitkamp of North Dakota, followed by Senator Alexander of Tennessee, myself, and then Senator Enzi of Wyoming, who has for 11 years been waiting for this vote, and I want him to have the last word.
Senator from North Dakota.
Mr. President, this is a day that has been 20 years in the making. You have heard argument after argument here about how this bill has been rushed, how it's not ready, how we have not yet had enough debate or deliberation. And I tell you, on behalf of the small business owners in my state who have told me it's about darn time that we do something about this, on behalf of them, I stand today and congratulate this body for taking this issue and taking a system that has been grossly unjust and incredibly unfair to Main Street businesses in our country and in our states and said, yes, the United States Senate will not stand back and wait any longer before we give you marketplace fairness. This bill could not be and could not have a better name than marketplace fairness. I got involved in this issue as a very young person. I like to say that because it was 20 years ago. Litigating a case before the United States Supreme Court. I was moved to take that case to the court by a woman who approached me and said, look, I'm just trying to survive. I'm trying to participate as a good business person in North Dakota, trying to support my community, trying to do everything right, collect my sales tax, but I am getting killed in the marketplace because people are sending catalogs, people come into my store, they look at my products, and they order this stuff through a mail order business. Please help me. And those pleas have for the last 20 years gone unheard by this body and by the House of Representatives. But yet today we have a chance. We have a chance to say to all those business people throughout our country who have been unfairly treated by a tax system that does not recognize today's modern-day method of marketing, this modern-day way that we do business and commerce in our country, has not been recognized, and they continue to struggle, continue to thrive. I congratulate the Senate. I congratulate all of the other senators who have pursued this with such vigor and such hope. And I say today is the day that we say yes to America's small businessmen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield the floor.
Senator from Tennessee.
President, you'll let me know when I've consumed 2.5 minutes.
Sir.
Mr. President, I congratulate the senator from North Dakota on 20 years of advocacy, Senator Enzi for his 11 years of tireless work here, and Senator Durbin for his effective advocacy, and I'd make 4 quick points. Senator from Texas said reinvigorating the economy should be the #1 priority for federal and state leaders. That is precisely the first sentence of Art Laffer, the economist, column in the Wall Street Journal, where he says states can cut their income tax rates if web vendors collect the sales taxes that are legally due. In other words, if you want economic growth, vote for the Marketplace Fairness Act. #2, the idea that this is too complex to do. Mr. President, more than half of the sales now made on the Internet are by retailers who collect the tax when it's sold. It's a tax that's already owed, so how could it be too complex for anybody else to do? It's already being done. So that's specious. #3, it has been said this should have gone to committee. It did. It just could never come out of committee because the chairman, and I say that with great respect, did not want it to. Should have had amendments. Yes, it should have had amendments. Why didn't it have amendments? Because the opponents to the bill resorted to objecting to every single amendment. And finally, Mr. President, and I say this to my Republican colleagues, this is a conservative bill. I just mentioned Mr. Laffer, and I read this earlier, but I want to read it again. The comments of the chairman of the American Conservative Union, Al Cardenas. Dear Senator, as you continue work next week on the Marketplace Fairness Act, I'd like to call to your attention to what conservatives are saying about the issue. They recognize, as I do, it is not the role of government to pick winners and losers in the marketplace by requiring brick-and-mortar stores to charge a sales tax while exempting Internet sales. He then lists the comments of Charles Krauthammer favoring the idea, Representative Paul Ryan favoring the idea, and of course, as we know, William F. Buckley did before he died. Many governors do. Mr. President, this is an idea for conservatives and for our country. I thank the President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Illinois.
Thanks to my colleagues who are on the floor, especially to Senator Alexander. Senator Enzi and I owe you a great debt of gratitude for your work on this bill, in helping us craft the bill, and in bringing the support together. I ask consent that the following 4 editorials be placed in the record at this point: from the New York Times, the Idaho State Journal, the Green Bay Press Gazette, and the Northwest Herald of Illinois.
Without objection.
Mr. President, what is happening with Internet sales? They're growing dramatically. Listen to these numbers. In 2012, online sales accounted for $225 billion in sales in America. In the next 5 years, it will double to $435 billion. It is an endeavor that has become part of our lives. And what we are asking in this bill is that those selling on the Internet be treated just the same as those selling on the corners of our streets. To make sure that the bricks and mortar businesses have a level playing field, that's all we're asking. This bill contains no new federal tax, no new state and local tax. What it does is collect taxes already owed. It simplifies the system by saying there will only be one taxing entity that identifies the taxes to be charged in every single state, one audit from each state. It tries to provide for the retailers the basic software that they need to get the job done. This is a fascinating bill. For those who follow the Senate, it's a rare opportunity for us to have Republicans and Democrats together on the floor supporting a bill that has the endorsement of business and labor and local officials all across the United States. It is clearly an idea whose time has come. And I hope that we can pass it with a good, strong vote and encourage our friends in the House to take it up quickly. I want to close by thanking my colleague from Wyoming. He's been a great partner in this effort. He came to it before I did. I replaced Senator Dorgan after Senator Dorgan's retirement and tried to keep this moving forward. Today's our day for a vote. I thank him for all of his hard work on his side of the aisle. I yield the floor to my colleague from Wyoming.
Senator from Wyoming.
Mr. President, I want to thank all the people that have participated in this, particularly Senator Durbin, who's helped to coalesce things, Senator Alexander, who came up with the idea for having a shorter bill, only 11 pages, never see it in the United States Senate, written in plain English, and it states rights. This doesn't cause the federal government to do anything. What it allows is for the states to do what they have already passed laws on, and I can see this from the standpoint of an individual. I know that in Wyoming, if you buy something on the Internet and you're not charged a tax, you're supposed to fill out a form, you're supposed to send it in. That's a difficult thing to do, hard to even keep track of. And this will eliminate that problem of individuals wanting to pay the tax but not knowing exactly how to do it. I know it from the standpoint of a small businessman. They have the experience of somebody coming in, trying on the goods, finding out exactly what they want, the color, the style, the feel, everything, and then ordering it on the Internet. And the even more ironic part of it is when they have a problem with it, they bring it back to the local retailer to fix it. And I've seen it from the standpoint of a mayor. I know in Wyoming that at least 30% and up to 70% of the revenue of the municipalities comes from the sales tax. And that's on a declining basis at the moment. That's not only what they run the city's streets and snow removal and a lot of the police, the fire protection, even education gets affected by the sales tax. But I've seen it from the standpoint of a legislator as well. And I know when we passed those taxes, we didn't say, okay, we just want to discriminate against the local business that pays the property tax, hires people locally, and participates in all the community stuff. And if you're out of state, we're going to let you off the hook. No legislator ever passed a bill like that. So this is one that corrects all of those things and brings fairness to the marketplace, and I think will make a significant difference, particularly in communities where they'll still be able to help out some of the charitable organizations and activities that will have to go by the wayside if this bill were not to pass. And I look forward to working with the people on the House side. I want to thank Senator Durbin, Senator Alexander, and Senator Heidkamp particularly for all of their effort on this, and Senator Heidkamp for her persistence over 22 years and knowing the intricacies of how it works being on the Canadian border, as well as having been involved in the original case where the Supreme Court challenged us to fix this problem. And today we have a chance to fix this problem. I ask people to vote for the bill. I yield the floor.
Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S-743, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 41, S-743, a bill to restore state sovereign rights to enforce state and local sales and use tax laws, and for other purposes.
Under the previous order, all post-cloture time is considered expired. Under the previous order, amendment number 745 is withdrawn. The question is on amendment number 741, offered by the senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Aye.
That's good.
Ms. Ayotte. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Baggage. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cowan. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Donnelly. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Flake. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Heinrich. Ms. Heitkamp. Mr. Heller. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Kane. Mr. King. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Manchin. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Markowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Scott. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Ms. Warren. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Blunt, Bozeman, Boxer, Harper, Coates, Crapo, Donnelly, Durbin, Enzi, Fisher, Franken, Harkin, Heitkamp, Isaacson, Johans, Johnson of South Dakota, Kane, King, Manchin, Pryor, Reed of Rhode Island, Roberts, Rockefeller, Sanders, Schatz, Warren, Whitehouse. Mr. Cardin, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Barrasso, Cruz, Heller, McConnell, Paul, Shaheen, Vitter, Wyden. Ms. Murkowski, no. Ms. Landrieu, aye. No. Mr. Tester, no. Mr. Leahy, aye. Mr. Cochran, aye. Ms. Mikulski, aye. Mr. Coburn, no. Ms. Ayotte, no. Mr. Udall of Colorado, aye. Mr. Heinrich, aye. Ms. Hirono, aye. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, no. Mr. Flake, no. Mr. Grassley, aye. Mr. Merkley, no. Mrs. Hagan, aye. Mr. Cowan, aye. Mr. Hatch, no. Ms. Baldwin, aye. Mr. Shelby, aye. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Kirk, no. Mr. Baucus, no. Mr. Udall of New Mexico, aye. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Brown, aye. Mr. Menendez, aye. Mr. Warner, aye. Mr. Nelson, aye. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Toomey, no. Mr. Murphy, aye. Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Rubio, no. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Mr. Scott, no. Casey. Mr. Casey, aye. Mrs. McCaskill. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, aye. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inhofe, no. Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin, aye. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts, no. Mr. McCain. Mr. McCain, aye. Ms. Cantwell. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune, aye. Chambliss. Mr. Chambliss. Aye. Mr. Portman. Mr. Portman. Aye. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal. Aye. Mr. Corker. Mr. Corker. Aye. Mrs. Murray. Mrs. Murray. Aye. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett. Aye. Ms. Stabenow. Ms. Stabenow. Aye. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Aye. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer. Aye.
Anyone wishing to vote or to change their vote? If not, on this vote, the yeas are 70, the nays are 24. The amendment is agreed to. The Majority Leader.
We have order.
Senate will be in order. Senate will be in order.
Mr. President, this afternoon I offered a consent agreement dealing with the budget. I withdrew that because we didn't have anyone here to object, and I had an inkling that there would be an objection if a Republican were here. Mr. President, we've been asked to move with regular order. We've done that. We've done our very best to do that. People want amendments. We've done our best to have bills with amendments. We have been asked, let's do as much work as we can with committees, and we've done that. We've had bills report out to committee. Those are the bills we've handled here, with rare exception. So now we've had our Republican friends saying for months and months, let's do things with regular order. We know how hard it was to get a budget passed. We had over 100 amendments we actually voted on here. We were here till 5 o'clock in the morning. And we got a budget, even though, you know, we've been through this before. We don't need to go into more detail. We've had a law signed by the President of the United States that gave us our budget allocations for several years. But we decided to do a resolution. It doesn't have to be signed by the President. I'm glad we did it. It was hard. Senator Murray, Senator Sessions did a good job allowing us to move forward on that. So now it's time we go forward. We've got a budget resolution we passed here in the House, in the Senate. We want to meet with the House and work out our differences. That's what we've done here for 2 centuries. We should do it on this bill. So I ask unanimous consent. The Senate proceed to consideration of count number 33, each con-res, that the amendment which is at the desk, the text of S. con-res 8, the budget resolution passed by the Senate, be inserted in lieu thereof. That H. con-res 25 as amended be agreed to, the motion reconsider be considered made and laid on the table, that the Senate insist on its amendment, request a conference of the House on the disagreeing votes of the 2 bodies, and the chair be authorized to appoint conferees on the part of the Senate, all with no intervening action or debate.
Objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Texas.
reserving the right to object, one of my concerns is that this conference report could be used to pass a reconciliation bill that would increase the debt ceiling without sufficient input from the minority party and without addressing the fundamental structural spending problems we have at the federal government that are leading to our unsustainable debt. This concern, I believe, is well-founded in history, in that reconciliation bills have been used to increase the debt ceiling at least 3 times, in 1986, in 1990, and in 1993. And so for that reason, reserving the right to object, I would ask consent that the leader modify his request so that it not be in order for the Senate to consider a conference report that includes tax increases or reconciliation instructions to increase taxes or to raise the debt limit.
Mr. President.
Is there objection to the modified request?
I would make a comment before
Majority Leader.
A decision on that. The Senate considered the budget, and that's an understatement. We voted on more than 100 amendments, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago. It was hard. The votes were hard. Senate passed its budget. It should now do a conference that the Senate passed. It's our budget. Senator from Texas was on the losing side. He had his view, and it lost. But now he wants us to agree by consent to adopt the losing side's view, or else he's not going to allow us to go to conference. For more than 2 centuries, I repeat, the 2 bodies are able to go work out their differences. The Senate passes something, the House passes something. You talk about regular order, that's it. We are able at that time to sit down and talk about the differences. Debt ceiling, he wants to talk about that. He wants to talk about Texas. Taxes, we're happy to do that. But let's do it in the context of regular order. That's what we should be doing around here. My friend from Texas is like the schoolyard bully. He pushes everybody around and is losing, and instead of playing the game according to the rules, he not only takes the ball home with him, but changes the rules. That way, no one wins, except the bully tries to indicate to people he has won. We're asking the Republicans to play by the rules and let us go to conference. I don't think it takes a lot of wizardry to figure out that we know how the American people feel about what they want done with this country. They want us to get on a pathway of growth and economic vitality which has been hindered. Now, the Republicans have they have things they want to do. We have things we want to do. Why can't we sit down as reasonable men and women and work out our differences? That's what a conference is all about. So I object to what my friend suggests. It's actually fairly ridiculous, if you want the truth, that before we go to conference, determine what you are going to do or not do in the conference. That's not how we do things around here.
Objection is heard. Is there objection to the original request?
Mr. President,
Senator from Texas.
I wasn't aware we were in a schoolyard.
There's either an objection or no objection. Let's hear from this. We've had enough of reserving the right to object.
Reserving the right to object.
Mr. President, there's no such thing, okay?
Mr. President, I object.
Is there objection?
Yes, I object.
Objection is heard. The clerk will read the bill for a third time.
Counter number 41, S743, a bill to restore state sovereign rights to enforce state and local sales and use tax laws and for other purposes.
Under the previous order, the question is on passage of S43 as amended. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. I got you. Johnson. I do. Okay, well, you gotta wait. Oh, I got you. Ms. Ayotte.
You did give me a yay, didn't you? I did.
Mr. Cochran. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso.
Did you get that?
I did. Yes, sir. Yes. Mr. Menendez. Sir.
No, you really helped us.
Mr. Baucus. Mr. Begich. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Murphy, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Coates, Roberts, Franken, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Corker, Mr. Cornyn, Mr. Cowan, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, I got you.
That's right, you don't.
Mr. Donnelly, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Flake, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley. Yes, sir. Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heinrich, Ms. Heitkamp. I got you. Mr. Heller, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Kane, Mr. King. Mr. Kirk. Gotcha. Ms. Klobuchar, Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Levin, Mr. Manchin, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson, Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott, Mr. Sessions, Mr. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall of Colorado, Mr. Udall of New Mexico, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Ms. Warren, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Baldwin, Bennett, Blumenthal, Blunt, Bozeman, Boxer, Cardin, Carper, Chambliss, Cochran, Collins, Coons, Corker, Cowan, Donnelly, Durbin, Enzi, Feinstein, Fisher, Franken, Gillibrand, Hagan, Harkin, Heinrich, Heitkamp, Hirono, Hoven, Isaacson, Johans, Johnson of South Dakota, Kane, King, Klobuchar, Landrieu, Leahy, Manchin, McCain, McCaskill, Menendez, Mikulski, Murphy, Murray, Nelson, Pryor, Reed of Rhode Island, Reed of Nevada, Rockefeller, Sanders, Schatz, Schumer, Sessions, Shelby, Stabenow, Thune, Udall of Colorado, Udall of New Mexico, Warner, Warren, Whitehouse, and Wicker. Mr. Baucus. Senators voting in the negative: Ayotte, Barrasso, Baucus, Coburn, Crapo, Cruz, Flake, Grassley, Hatch, Heller, Inhofe, Johnson of Wisconsin, Kirk, Lee, McConnell, Merkley, Murkowski, Paul, Risch, Roberts, Rubio, Scott, Shaheen, Tester, Toomey, Vitter, and Wyden. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham. Aye. Mr. Brown. Aye. Mr. Coates. Aye.
We adopted the text of our bills in their resolutions, using all of their language.
Mr. Portman. Aye. Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin. Aye. Ms. Cantwell. Ms. Cantwell. Aye. Mr. Casey. Mr. Casey, aye.